Happy New Year! How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on the last day of 2023. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house and learning on New Year's Eve? I'm so proud of you. Steven in New Hampshire, Bill in Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Karen in Northern California, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Maine, Carla in Brazil, Sharon in New Jersey, Joe in the Inland Empire, Marjorie in Virginia, Ella saying shalom. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Jeannie Zabe Schechter in memory of her son, Michael Zielinski, whose yahrzeit was a few days ago. May Michael's memory always be for a blessing. May his neshama, may his soul have a tremendous elevation, a great aliyah in the world of souls, and may our learning tonight lift him even just a little bit higher. We say amen. And Jeannie, may you and your husband, Michael, and your whole family and all your loved ones be elevated and showered with blessings. And thank you for stepping up once again to enable us to share more Torah with more people around the world. We say amen and thank you. Today is 12:31. Okay. So we are working our way through chapter 6, and today we'll finally complete our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 6 of tractate Bava Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. Our daf today is 59, page 59. And we've been discussing damages in a case. Am I crazy? It's Mishna number 1, right? Just double checking. I don't want to speak wrongly, but Mishna number 1, right? Yeah, Mishna number 1 here in chapter 6. So we've been talking about damages. Generally, we've been sort of figuring out how damages are assessed and appraised in a case where an animal gets out and eats or tramples in somebody's private property, eats their produce, and we got into how that could be affected by whether the person was negligent or not in safeguarding the animal from getting off his own property and into somebody else's private property. And yesterday, maybe we won't call it a cliffhanger, but we were looking at this dispute where the exilarch, the head of the Jewish community in Bava within the Persian Empire, gave a ruling that when a man cut down his neighbor's, I don't know if it was his neighbor, but somebody else's date palm, which was one of 3 in a stand, a mature tree that was producing fruit, producing dates. And so the exilarch ruled that, okay, there were 3 trees. Together they were worth 100 dinars. This man cut down one of them. So he owes 33 1/3 dinars. And the perpetrator didn't accept the ruling, and he went to Rav Nachman, who said, well, when we evaluate how to assess damages, you know, when some kind of plants growing in the field, shall we say, we evaluate how much less is either the land worth, where we have a patch of land and we would assess if it were 60 times bigger, how much it would be diminished by the damage that was done in, let's say, a garden bed or in a portion of a field, or if one stalk was damaged, how much diminishing would there be in the value of 60 stalks? Presumably 60 trees, now that we would, if we cut down one tree, how much less would it be worth if there was a stand of 60 trees? And that's how Rav Nachman ruled. But the thing is, what we've seen is that 1 in 60 method for appraising damages was used where your animal gets out and eats the produce or does damage on the property of another person. Here, it wasn't his animal that destroyed the date palm. It was a person himself. It was his direct action. So we would think that in that case, he pays for the damage that he did, and we don't use the same method that we would use when an animal does the damage. And we were in the midst of that debate when it ended yesterday. So let's continue. So Abaye said, Rabbi Yosei HaGalili and Rabbi Yishmael both said the same thing. They are of the same opinion that the appraisal for damages is based on the value of the produce remaining in the field once it ripens. So at the end of yesterday, we were talking specifically, well, if the animal comes in, there's going to be a difference if it eats ripe fruit, if it eats unripe fruit, but that's close to being ripe, if he eats fruit that's just starting to bud, or if he's eating the shoots and tendrils of a plant that hasn't grown yet at all. So the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili is that we stated above in the Baraisa, i.e. that damage is paid for an animal eating unripe grain, is assessed according to what remains of the grain. In other words, what he ate didn't have the chance to become like what he left, and so we assess the value of what was left, and then, to figure out what now the missing part, and that's what the owner of the animal has to pay for. So the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael is as it is taught in a Baraisa. Now the verse states, Exodus 22:4, the best of his field and the best of his vineyard he shall pay. Right, when your animal eats produce of your neighbor, which means he must pay according to the best quality field of the injured party or the best quality vineyard of the injured party. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva says the verse comes only to allow injured parties to collect compensation from the superior quality land of the one liable to pay for the damage, and by a kal v'chomer inference, it is derived that this applies to consecrated property. Compensation for damaging consecrated property is paid from one's best quality assets. If you're going to do that for your neighbors, certainly going to do that for land that is technically owned by the Holy Temple, when the temple is standing. And do not say that Rabbi Yishmael's statement should be interpreted in accordance with the opinion of Rav Idi bar Avin. As Rav Idi bar Avin says, here it concerns a case where the animal ate the produce of one garden bed from among several garden beds, but we do not know whether the garden bed it ate from was lean or choice. Therefore, the verse says to the owner of the animal, arise and pay choice land, equivalent to the best quality land that there is now remaining. And the court does not assume that the animal ate produce from the lesser quality garden bed, as we do not say this. Now, what is the reason that Rabbi Yishmael does not hold in accordance with the opinion of Rav Idi bar Avin? It is because he accepts the principle that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. If your animal ate, and we don't know whether it ate the choice produce or the lean produce, then the one who's seeking to extract the money, the plaintiff, is going to have to prove that the defendant's animal ate the choice produce in order to get the higher number of damages. If he can't prove that, then we're going to have to give him from the, a lower value, a lesser value. Excuse me. Okay. Where am I? So rather, Rabbi Yishmael interprets the Torah's expression, the best of his field, as requiring payment with the best quality land before him. And what is this? It is that which remained in the field and subsequently sprouted, and the compensation is based on the value of this. So the Gemara examines the Baraisa. The master said, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, in what case is this statement that the court appraises the vineyard or group of trees that were damaged said? It is when the animal ate young branches of vines or shoots of fig trees. And the Gemara comments, this indicates that if the animal ate budding grapes, the court views them and appraises them as if they were grapes ready to be picked, because they had already budded. All the owner of the grapes had to do was wait a few weeks, and then he would have had full ripe grapes. They never reached that state because the animal ate them. So we're going to appraise them as if they were ripe. But say and try to explain accordingly the latter clause of the Baraisa, which teaches that if the animal ate unripe figs or half-ripe grapes, that is where the court views them as if they were grapes ready to be picked, indicating that if the animal ate the grapes in the budding stage, then the court views how much the vineyard was worth before the animal ate them and how much it is worth now. Therefore, the two clauses of the Baraisa appear to be contradictory. So Ravina said, bind them together and teach them as a single statement, like this. In what cases this statement said that the court appraises how much the field was worth when the animal ate from it? It is said in a case where the animal ate young branches of vines or shoots of fig trees. But if it ate grapes in the budding stage, unripe figs, or half-ripe grapes, the court views them and appraises them as if they were grapes ready to be picked. And the Gemara asks, if so, the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda is identical to the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua with regard to grapes in the budding stage. Why would the Mishna state their opinions separately? And the Gemara answers there is a difference between them with regard to the weakening of the vine. A vine is weakened by the grapes growing on it as they draw nutrients from the roots and branches. Now that the grapes have been eaten, the vine is no longer weakened. Therefore, according to one opinion, the court takes into consideration this reduction of the weakening of the vine, and that amount is deducted when calculating the damages. It's as if the animal, by eating these grapes, actually pruned the vine, which provided a small amount of benefit, and that a little small amount of benefit is deducted from the damages that would otherwise be owing. Whereas according to the other opinion, the court does not take this into account. But their respective opinions are not defined, and it is not clear which Tana takes this weakening into account and which does not. So Abaye said their respective opinions are defined. They're certainly defined. And it is possible to know which sage held which opinion. Since who is the Tana who is concerned for the weakening of the vine? In other words, who is the sage that is going to look at the sort of whole situation and reduce the amount of damages awarded by any possible benefit that the damager, in this case the animal that ate produce in the neighbor's field, any benefit that it gave, right? So if it ate the fruit, it's sort of like pruning. So if there's any benefit conferred on the owner's land by this pruning that the animal did, that's going to get deducted from the cost. And which sage holds that we do this kind of, larger analysis and reduce the amount of damages by any possible benefit that was done? It is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, with regard to the indemnity payments that a rapist must pay his victim, who had been a virgin, he does not pay compensation for the pain caused by the rape. And this is due to the fact that she will ultimately suffer the same pain during her first act of sexual intercourse with her husband when she marries. This opinion is such a minority opinion, the rabbis immediately overruled that. The rabbi said to him, the pain of a woman who has intercourse willingly is not comparable to the pain of a woman who has intercourse by rape. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, so that did not become law at all. But Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, in that other case, sought to say that if it can be argued, I don't think he really believed this, but if it can be argued that the rapist confers some micro benefit through his shocking crime, then that amount would be deducted, from the damages that she's entitled to receive. And the rabbis just overruled him. Abaye said, these Tanai, but at any rate, the point is that he reduced the damages awarded by whatever, benefit you could ascribe to the one doing the damage. So Abaye said, these Tanaim, these sages of the Mishnaic period, these Tanaim following, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said the same thing concerning this matter. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said this ruling that we said with regard to the case of damages from the rapist and the case of the vine. And as to these other Tanaim, what is the case in which they gave a similar ruling? And this is as it is taught in Baraisa concerning the law of one who injured a pregnant woman, thereby causing her to miscarry, for which the Torah holds him liable to pay her husband compensation. And Rabbi Yosef says the court appraises the compensation for the miscarried offspring and deducts the amount that they would have paid for a midwife. Since she miscarried, the husband no longer has to pay for a midwife. So that is deducted from the compensation. And Ben Azai says the court deducts the value of the extra sustenance the husband would have been required to provide for his pregnant wife, who is no longer pregnant. And the one who says that the court appraises the compensation for the miscarried offspring minus the amount they would have paid for a midwife would all the more so concede that the appraisal is minus the value of the extra sustenance. But the one who says that the appraisal, we deduct from it the value of the extra sustenance he would have to feed, a pregnant wife who eats more, does not necessarily hold that the court appraises the compensation for the miscarried offspring minus the money they would have paid for a midwife. Why? Because the husband can say to the damager, my wife is capable and does not require a midwife to assist her when giving birth, so we will not deduct the cost that I would have had to pay a midwife. Now, returning to the discussion of the appraisal of compensation for damage, the Gemara relates, Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, acted in accordance with the opinion of Rav Nachman and appraised a damaged date palm relative to an area 60 times greater than the particular area where the tree was standing. Right? So now we see that Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, agree with Rav Nachman that this guy who cut down the date palm would have to, the damage that he has to pay for would be appraised, as a date palm in a stand of 60 trees or in a piece of land 60 times larger that held date palms. And so the amount of damages would be much smaller than just replacing the one date palm. In a different version of this law, a different version of this halacha, this law is also stated. Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, appraised the damage caused to a date palm relative to the assessment of the patch of land where the tree stood, i.e. how much it was worth with the tree and how much it was worth without it. So that, again, it's going to produce a smaller amount of damages than if we just say there were 3 trees worth 100 dinars, one of them is gone, so the guy owes 33 dinars. The Gemara concludes, and the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, with regard to an Aramean date palm, i.e. one of lesser quality, and it is assessed relative to the land. But the law is in accordance with the opinion of the exilarch with regard to a Persian date palm, and it happened in Persia, as they are of higher quality, and each one is valuable, and it is not assessed relative to the land. So the exilarch had it right. And the law about this, in a case where an animal ate fruit from, or a person cut down a date palm belonging to another, the following distinction applies. If it was a date palm, not of the best quality, then the damage caused is assessed relative to an area of ground 60 times larger than the area containing the tree. But if the date palm was of a variety bearing superior quality fruit, then the damage is appraised with regard to the tree itself by calculating how much it was worth before and how much it is worth after the damage. Right? So it's a very different outcome. And it kind of makes sense because when we talk about this tree that produces superior quality fruit, undoubtedly, it's harder to obtain such a tree. It takes much longer to grow, takes more care, they're more unusual, etc. And if you damage something like that, yeah, you're going to have to replace that tree. You're going to have a much higher cost of damages. If it's an inferior quality tree, it seems like it will be more fungible, easier to replace. So not only will the absolute damages be less, but the method of appraisal will create an even smaller amount of damages. So the Gemara relates, Eliezer Zera. Now it's a new incident. Now this is fascinating, and this is where I got the title of today's class. So the Gemara relates, Eliezer Zera was wearing black shoes, which was unlike the Jewish custom of that time and locale. And he was standing in the market of Nehardea, right? So Nehardea is in the Babylonian Jewish community. Officials of the house of the exilarch, that's why we're telling this story, because now that we're talking about the exilarch, officials of the house of the exilarch found him and said to him, "What is different about you that causes you to wear these shoes?" And he said to them, "I am wearing them because I am in mourning over the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem. And so I wear black shoes, as is the custom of mourners." They said to him, "Are you a man of such importance to publicly mourn over Jerusalem?" They thought that it was simply presumptuousness on his part, since he was acting against the prevalent Jewish custom. So they brought him to the prison and incarcerated him for wearing the wrong shoes. Now, here's a very interesting note about this. So about these shoes, Tosafos questioned this statement since from various other sources it appears that the common practice was to wear black shoes. So Rabbeinu Tam explains that the Jews would wear black shoes with white straps by which they could be identified, whereas the non-Jews would wear completely black shoes. And Eliezer Zera wore shoes with the black straps. So the Meiri cites an opinion that the no, let me skip that. This is what I wanted to read. Shoes in the time of the Gemara were usually similar to shoes shown in this image, but the image is not of high enough resolution that I could put in front of the camera. Yet there were differences in the number of straps or laces and their color. Right? So most shoes look pretty similar to each other, and the fashion differences, if you will, were in the straps and laces. So every detail of the shoe provided a sign of a specific social status. Apparently, there were such differences between the shoes of Gentiles and those of Jews. Although Tosafos explained that the difference was not in the shoe itself, but in the color of the straps. So the difference provided a distinguishing mark between Jews and Gentiles. And the sages were severely opposed to one who changed the color of his shoes in order to resemble the Gentiles. I mean, it's interesting, you know, it's not like they had a completely different outfit, right, where they were going around with a bekesh, you know, like a long black coat, or just, let's say, a black suit and a black fedora. You know, many neighborhoods now, at least Orthodox Jews, they look completely different. And it wasn't so much the head covering. Jews have always kept their heads covered. Maybe not always, but whatever. But that wasn't the distinguishing feature. Maybe everyone covered their heads in this society. So it was all about the shoes. Now, after the destruction of the second temple, some would go to great lengths to mourn for Jerusalem, refraining from eating certain foods and wearing special garments. The sages in the generation after the destruction of the Holy Temple limited such mourning. They permitted only certain forms of mourning as a reminder of the destruction. Nevertheless, in each generation, there were certain individuals who were renowned for their piety and their fear of heaven, and they were known as mourners of Zion, based on the verse, to appoint those that mourn Zion, who accepted upon themselves additional customs of mourning. So what we have here is a sage who had accepted upon himself this additional mourning custom to wear the shoes of a mourner, which in that locale where they didn't know him and didn't realize he was a sage, made it look like he was just a Jew who wanted to dress like the Gentiles. And they were, in that period enforcing the laws. You can imagine that in the wake of the destruction of the temple, there was a tremendous fear that Judaism would be lost, right? That so much of Judaism was centered around the sacrifices being brought in the Holy Temple. And when it was destroyed in the year 70, there was a tremendous fear. And it's somewhat miraculous that the sages were able to sort of, there were already many customs. I mean, people were praying daily. There were synagogues already. But there was a big update, as it were, of what Judaism was and how it was practiced in the wake of the destruction of the temple. And it could have been a time when people despaired and just, en masse went off the derrick, like walked away from observant Judaism. They didn't. Like the sages were able to sort of, model this new Judaism and get everyone on board. And it's too bad people didn't get on board while the temple was standing, because then maybe the temple wouldn't have been destroyed. At any rate, here we have this incident in Nehardea, where this unknown sage to the locals seemed to be wearing black shoes just to assimilate, whereas he said, no, I wear it as a sign of mourning. And they said, well, that's really only something big sages do. Who are you? And he said, I am a sage. And now they're going to say, prove it. So, since he was acting against the prevalent Jewish custom in that area, they brought him to the prison and incarcerated him. Eliezer Zerah said to them, I am a great man, meaning a scholar, and it is fitting for me to mourn publicly over the destruction of Jerusalem. They said to him, how do we know that you are a scholar? He said to them, either you ask of me a matter of Jewish law, and I will answer you, or I will ask you a matter of Jewish law, and you will answer me. And they said to him, okay, you ask us. He said to them, with regard to one who cuts a cluster of flowers on the stem of a date palm belonging to another person, what is he required to pay? And they said to him, he pays the value of the date stem. He said to them, but ultimately they will become ripe dates, which are worth more. They said to him, if so, he pays the value of the future dates. He said to them, but he did not take ripe dates from the other person. So how can the court obligate him to pay for damage that he did not cause? They said to Eliezer Zerah, okay, so you tell us the correct appraisal for the date stem. And he said to them, the court appraises the damage relative to a similar piece of land 60 times the size. And they said to him, who says an opinion as you do so that you can prove that you are correct? And he said to them, Shmuel is alive and his court exists. You can ask him. And they sent the question before Shmuel together with the ruling of Eliezer Zerah. And Shmuel said to them, he is saying well to you, because the law is as he says. The appraisal is relative to an area 60 times greater. And upon hearing this, the officials of the exilarch realized that he was indeed a great man and a Torah scholar, and they released him. Now, the Mishna on page 55b teaches that Rabbi Shimon says, if the animal ate ripe produce, the owner pays the value of the ripe produce eaten. And what is the reason for Rabbi Shimon's opinion? This is that the Merciful One states in the Torah, and it feed in another's field, Exodus 22:4, which teaches that the court appraises the damage relative to another field. And this statement applies specifically with regard to produce that requires a field to grow. For one's animal eating this produce, in our example, which do not require the field in order to ripen further, right? They're fully ripe and ready to go. The animal's owner must pay their value as they are. So forget the whole, field 60 times greater, or, plants 60 times more. If the animal eats ripe produce, whether it's attached to the stem or not, even if it's still on the stem, but it's ready to go, it's fully ripened, then we assess the value of the produce and forget this other system. Once it's ripe, we assess its value as ripe fruit, and that's what the owner of the animal pays. Now, Rav Huna Bar Chia says that Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba says, Rav judged a practical halacha, practical law, on a certain issue in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, despite the fact that in general the law is not in accordance with Rabbi Meir, which is an interesting statement because whenever we have a unattributed halacha in a Mishnah, it's generally understood to be in accordance with Rabbi Meir, right? But when Rabbi Meir's name is actually mentioned, then it's usually because he has a minority opinion that was overruled by the rabbis. And the reason that his name is not attached in those unattributed Mishnahs, the anonymous Mishnahs, which are all the ones he formulated, is because he got himself sort of in political trouble with the rabbinic leadership. So yes, Mishnahs that are where the law is in Rabbi Meir's name usually means that was his was the minority opinion. But here in this case, so the point is that Rav did rule according to a law that was in Rabbi Meir's name and therefore was a minority opinion. But Rav nevertheless ruled according to that opinion. And furthermore, Rav ruled that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, even though in the case we're about to mention, Rabbi Shimon's was the minority opinion. And Rav Huna Bar Chia explains, Rav judged a practical halacha in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, as it is taught in a baraisa, in the case of a field designated by its owner as a lien for his wife's marriage contract, which he subsequently wants to sell, if he wrote a document of sale to a first buyer, but his wife did not sign for him to endorse the sale, and subsequently the husband wrote a document of sale to a second buyer, and his wife signed for him, so she thereby loses the lien of her marriage contract, since the sale is effective and she can no longer collect from the field. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says that she can say, I did it only to please my husband, but I did not mean it, and I never intended to forego my rights. What claim do you, the purchasers, have against me? Therefore, the lien is still in effect, and Rav judged the case in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And Rav ruled that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon says if one's animal ate ripe produce, the owner pays the value of the ripe produce eaten. Therefore, if it ate 1 sah of produce, he pays the value of 1 sah of produce. And if it ate 2 sah, he pays for 2 sah. Although Rabbi Shimon's opinion is the minority one, Rav ruled in accordance with it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 6. Here's Mishnah number 2, short Mishnah, very short Gemara. In a case of one who stacks his produce in another person's field without the owner's permission, and an animal belonging to the owner of the field eats the produce, the owner of the field is exempt. And if the animal is injured by the produce, the owner of the produce is liable for the harm done to the animal. But if the owner of the produce stacked his produce in the field with the permission of the owner of the field, then the owner of the field is liable for any damage caused to the produce by animals belonging to the owner of the field. That's the Mishnah. And the Gemara says, shall we say that which we learned in the Mishnah, this Mishnah that we just read, is not in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe? As if the Mishnah were in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, doesn't he say a homeowner who gives another permission to bring items into his courtyard is not responsible for them unless the homeowner accepts on himself to safeguard them? In other words, unless he specifically says, I will safeguard your property while it's here, he is not liable for any harm that happens to that property, even though it's stacked in his courtyard with his permission. That's Rebbe's opinion. And the Mishnah does not mention any such acceptance of responsibility by the owner of the field where the owner of the produce stacked it even with his permission. So Rav Papa said, here we are dealing with the supervisor of the threshing floors to whom people would entrust their produce. As since the supervisor says to the owner of the produce, bring it in and stack it, it is as though he had said to them, bring it in and I will supervise it for you. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Here's Mishnah number 3. One who sends a fire. Okay, we've been talking about oxen and eating and trampling and goring, and we talked about pit, and now we're finally going to start to talk about fire, which we've mentioned incidentally a few times, but now we're in that fourth category of damage, fire. One who sends a fire, i.e., places a burning object in the hand of a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor, is exempt for any damage later caused by the fire according to human laws, but liable according to the laws of heaven. If he sent it in the hand of a halachically competent person, an adult of normal intelligence, then the halachically competent person is liable, not the one who sent him, right? Because if you put a torch in the hand of a competent person and then he goes and sets a fire with it, okay, well, he's a person who can avoid transgression, and if he starts a fire that harms people, he started the fire. Whereas if you put this burning object in the hands of somebody who is not halachically competent, and then they go start a fire, that's where you're going to assess liability, not in every case, but in some cases, to the one who placed fire into the hands of the halachically incompetent person. Now, the Mishna says there is no liability in a human court, only in a heavenly court. But as we'll see, there actually can be liability in an earthly court. If one person brought the fire and one other person subsequently brought the wood, causing the fire to spread, well, then the one who brought the wood is liable for any damage caused. Conversely, if one person brought first the wood and subsequently another person brought the fire and then started the fire, then the one who brought the fire is liable, since it was he who actually kindled the wood. And if another came and fanned the flame, and as a result the fire spread and caused damage, then the one who fanned it is liable, since he is the proximate cause of the damage. If the wind fanned the flames, all the people involved are exempt, since none of them actually caused the damage. That's Mishnah number 3. I'm actually pretty close to done, so if you've got questions or comments, please get them in. So the Gemara. Reish Lakish says, in the name of Chizkiah, they taught that one who sends fire in the hand of a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor is exempt only when he conveyed to that person a glowing coal. And then one of these halachically incompetent people fanned the coal himself and created a fire. That's where you would be liable only by a heavenly court and not in an earthly court. You gave him a coal, and then he turned it into a fire. But if one conveyed a torch to a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor, then the one who gave it to him is liable. And what is the reason for this law? The action of the one who gave it to him directly caused the fire to spread. And Rabbi Yochanan says, even if he conveyed a torch to him, he is exempt. And what is the reason? It is the tongues of the deaf mute that cause the damage, since torches do not cause fires on their own. And the one who gives dangerous objects to a deaf mute is not rendered liable for the damage caused unless he conveys branches, gavza, to him, of thin wood and a candle, since in that case his own action, i.e. that of the one who sent the flame, definitely caused the fire to spread. Now we're on page 68 at the top. And the Mishnah teaches that if one sent a fire in the hand of a halachically competent person, then the halachically competent person is liable. If another came and fanned the flame, the one who fanned it is liable. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, with regard to the correct text of the Mishnah, the one who teaches it using the word fanned, liba, is not mistaken, and the one who teaches it using the word blue, niba, is not mistaken. And Rav Nachman explained, the one who teaches using the word fanned, liba, is not mistaken, as it is written, with a flame, belabat, of fire, Exodus 3:2. And the one who teaches using the word blue, like he blew on it, niba, is not mistaken, as it is written, he creates the fruit, niv, of the lips. Like the fruit of the lips is breath. which can be interpreted as referring to the breath of the lips. That's what I've got for us today. Let me take a few questions. So Sharon says, I know I asked this, but I don't remember a response. Are these animals just walking about loose? I would be responsible if my dogs damaged someone's property if I just allowed him to run around loose. How else would an ox just happen into a vineyard, garden, etc.? Well, the problem with an ox is that, no matter how well you enclose it or tie it up, if the ox wants to go, it'll go, right? Unless it's like a heavy-duty stockade, an ox can just break through, the kinds of structures that they had at that time. So that's why they said that you have to safeguard your ox in some reasonable way. And then, if it gets stung by a bee and goes nuts and breaks out, that's that unforeseeable circumstance that is beyond the control of its owner. And then you also say, well, I'm certainly allowed to let my ox roam within my field, which is fenced in, and I didn't know that there was a breach in my fence. I walk my property. I check regularly that the fence hasn't been breached. But just this morning, something happened. Who knows? An elephant came through and breached my fence, or there was a flood, or something happened. Termites got into it unbeknownst to me. And so the ox was able to get into my neighbor's property. So, I think the point that you're making is, was the person negligent or not? But that question isn't necessarily so easy to answer depending on the circumstances. Bill, it is also worth noting that not only did the post-temple sages manage to hold the children of Israel together, but also because the Judaism that comes down to us but also because the Judaism that comes down to us looks how it does. Imagine for a moment an alternate history where instead people try to revive the status quo from before Solomon's temple, making sacrifices in smaller temples and shrines. But then the unity that was given by the temple and later by the memory of the temple is lost, and the Jewish tradition fractures more and more with each generation until it's lost. How wondrous is the God who orders history to guide us in ways unseen toward his goal, the full flourishing of the human person. It's a beautiful thought, Bill, and I totally agree with you. I think that there's an amazing movie to be made about the destruction of Jerusalem and the rise of rabbinic Judaism, not as some kind of a power play by Chazal, by our sages of blessed memory, but just like as you're saying, to create a post-temple Judaism that unifies the nation as a whole in the absence of a temple and in the presence of this despair that Jews around the world must have felt at that time. Like everything that they'd been told, was like the Torah prescribes that, the way that you atone for certain sins is to bring an offering. Now, before there was Solomon's temple, we still had the Mishkan, the tabernacle, right? And the offerings needed to be brought there. There was just a very short periods where people could erect their own altars, right? But very, there wasn't such a period, but it was a very small amount of time when that period existed. Even before the Torah was given, right? We certainly have the tradition that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob would build altars as they traveled and give offerings. But, under the leadership of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, as he escaped from Jerusalem in the ashes of Jerusalem and, asked the Roman general, give me Yavne and its sages, and he already, figured out, well, we have to figure it out. He didn't have the exact formula, but he said, we have to figure it out how this is going to go into the future. And I 100% agree with you, Bill, that, just as God takes a sort of more direct and keen interest in the affairs of the world's leaders, how much more so in the leadership of the Jewish people, and at a critical time like that. So I do think that the sages of that period, and especially Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, were divinely inspired, and God was working through history, to create, this model of Judaism that would survive and would flourish around the world. And, we have encountered, as we are now, Jew hatred everywhere. But I'll tell you, you talk about God working through history, one of the, let's say silver linings of Jew hatred and the way that Jews get persecuted, everywhere just for being Jews, is that there's a kind of cycle that repeats itself, that Jews come to a place, they're invited there, they bring tremendous blessings to the people, they help, the leaders organize and improve, and the Jews are successful and they prosper in that place, and then, Jew hatred starts to rise, motivated in part by jealousy, in part by Jews who don't behave so well, but that's usually not a very big part of it. It's more the jealousy, more just that prevalence of the oldest hatred that there is, and then the Jews move on, right? And the result of that is that the diaspora includes Jews everywhere, right? And so if the Jews are meant to be a light to the nations, right? That's part of the Jewish mission, to be an Or HaGoyim, right? A light to the nations, about the oneness of God, that there is a God, that God created the world and runs the world and loves all people, that it's the Jewish mission to spread that message. And if they, were only in Israel, that message wouldn't have traveled as far as it did in the millennia since. It's just my own observation. Anyway, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, the first day of 2024. So everyone's celebrating New Year's Eve tonight. May it be a beautiful, merry, happy new year. May this coming year be our best one yet. May we all grow in wisdom and strength and kindness, not necessarily in that order. And it's a real joy for me to be, learning with you as we venture together in our journey through Daf Yomi. We're just a few pages away from the end of part 1 of Bava Kamma. In the Korn, it's a 2-volume tractate. And we'll just keep plugging along. And this was episode, what was it? 1457, right? So we've done 1,457 pages out of 2,711, right? And with God's help, we'll keep plugging along until we get to that Siyum Hashas, God willing, that completion of our entire Daf Yomi journey in the year 2027. All the best.